Hello and welcome to the tutorial on how to create new reference files for the HLA allele caller for the latest data available on the IMGT website. And I recommend that you do this setup on your own hard disk rather than doing it on the T drive, and that way any mistakes you made will be on your hard disk only and won't be on the T drive, and no one else will be able to access the new references you've created until you have finished creating them and testing them. So I've created a directory called HLA on my D drive inside a folder called Documents, and currently there's nothing in there. So the first step is to copy some base files across from the T drive, and you only have to do this the first ever time that you generate references. Once they're on there, you can just use this directory many times in the future. If I open a new File Explorer window and navigate to T drive, Laboratory, Flex References, HLA, and inside there is a directory called References Setup. So if you open that directory and then just copy all of the contents and then paste them into the directory you created on your hard disk, the Documents HLA in my case. And now the next thing that I need to do is create a directory for the new version of the references that I'm going to create. In this case it's version 3.41. So I'll create a new folder, the 3.41.00, following the same naming convention as we used for the others. Currently there's nothing in here, so what I need to do is go to the web and download two files. So I go to the IMGT site, I need to download the ambiguities file. So on the resources section here, I choose SBT ambigs, sequence-based typing ambiguities. Then scroll down and click on download the top file, version 3.41. I click on the upwards arrow and choose Save As so that I can save it into the directory that I've created. Navigate to that directory, D Documents HLA version 3.41, and click Save. Okay, that is done. Next I need to download what's called the Dat file, which contains all the data for the HLA alleles. So I go to the FTP site again from the resources and choose the top address. I need to scroll down to find the HLA Dat file. In this case here, you'll notice there's an HLA Dat and an HLA Dat.2. Well, I'm wanting to use the latest one, and this is the 10th of August, much later than the 28th of January. I'm not sure why they've left that one in the directory. Right click on the file name, Save Target As. And again, I'll navigate to the directory that I need and just save it with the default name. You can change these names if you want, but there's no need to. So I'm just saving it as hla.dat. This one will take a little bit longer to download because there's quite a bit more data in it than there was in the Excel file. But it shouldn't take too long on our network. Okay, that's done. So now you can see in this directory that I've created on my hard disk, I have hla.dat and ambiguity, or whatever file names you chose to save them as. Now the final thing that I need to do is tell the allele caller which directory I am using for my references. By default, it will be pointing to the T drive, which is not what I want it to point to. In order to update the location for the reference files for the HLA allele caller, go to the C drive, config directory, and there should be a file in there called connectionstrings.xml. If you do not have this file, go to the T drive, computing, applications, config and copy config connection strings.xml from this directory. Then go back to the C drive, config, and paste the file into here. I don't need to paste it because it's already here. In order to open the file, if you double click on the file, it may well open in a web browser, which is of no use to you. So to ensure that we open it in a text editor, right click on the file and choose Open With, and then choose a text editor. I'm going to choose PSPad, but you could easily choose WordPad instead. When you open the file, your file should look like this. And specifically, you want to see the lines HLA local and these two here, HLA references path and local HLA references path. If your file doesn't have these lines, you will need to go to the T drive, Computing, Applications Config, and copy connection strings.xml and paste it into your C config directory, overriding your existing connection strings.xml file. Make sure you close it in the text editor before you paste the new version in. Okay, so now we can see that HLA local is set to false, which means we're not looking at the local directory for HLA. We want to set that to true. So now we'll be looking for HLA references on our local drive. And by default, on the T drive copy of the connection strings, it sets the directory path for the local versions of the reference files to this directory here, C documents HLA. If in the previous step you saved your HLA reference files into a different directory than this, just change the path accordingly. So I have mine on the D drive because my C drive doesn't have much space on it. So once I've changed the path to match where I saved the files before, I save the file and then I open up HLA allele caller. Once I open HLA allele caller, you'll see a message pop up that says that you are using references in your local configuration to call alleles. You should only do this when testing new versions of reference data. We're creating a new version of reference data and then we'll test it. Or when you have no access to the network reference data. So in this case, because we're creating a new version, it's fine. But if you're about to call alleles on a project that we're working on, and you get this message, it'll alert you that you need to go back to your connection strings file and change HLA local back to false so that it looks on the T drive for the reference data. So OK that message, and the allele caller will then pop up. And if you already had the HLA allele caller running before you updated your config file to point to the place on your hard disk, you need to close HLA allele caller and then reopen it again. From the edit menu, choose Preferences. Takes a few seconds to open. And here's a check to make sure that you updated that C config file correctly. You notice that all of the paths here are D documents HLA. If I hadn't updated it correctly, it would be pointing to T laboratory, flex references, etc. Now that I see they're all pointing to my D drive, I click on the Update IMGT Data button. Navigate to that directory, D documents HLA version 3.41. Double click on the ambiguity file. Double click on the HLA.dat file. And now we'll start creating the new reference files. This consists of two parts. The quick part is just effectively copying the previous version that we had, 3.38. Next, it will then create the core directory and again just copy the basic files across. And then comes the slow part, which is when it reads in that big Dat file and extracts all the HLA data and creates the reference files which will have v3.41 in their name. So this will take quite a few minutes, and so we just have to sit by and be patient. So you see now it's created the allele groups 3.41. After a period of between 10 and 20 minutes, the allele caller will finish generating all the files. And as soon as it finishes, it will open up the log file automatically. You need to look through the log file to see if there is anything that needs to be dealt with, i.e. errors in the Dat file. So the log file starts off by showing the files that you use, the ambiguity file and the Dat file. Next it shows you the group and references file that it created. Then we see the first error. There was a group error in the ambiguity file in that it called a group A240234G, but there were insufficient members for it to be a group, i.e. there was only one allele within that. So it's not really a group. Then we see there's another Dat file error where HLA B13123Q had a feature for 3' UTR which went from positions 2965 to 3329, but in the Dat file there were only 3305 nucleotides, so it couldn't possibly have gone to 3329. These errors need to be reported to IMGT. We always delete the allele DRB114-141 from the references file because it has the same sequence as one of the DRB3 alleles. There were two group errors which you will need to look into, whereby there are, in both cases, there was one null allele within the group, but according to the Dat file, that null allele didn't have the same exon 2 and 3 sequences as the other members of the group. And finally, we have the CWD info, and this basically says that from the previous CWD file, these alleles no longer existed, and so we've updated them to new names because basically extra alleles have been added and so the names have been changed. So once you've read through the log file and worked out what you're going to do with each of the errors, we need to go back to the HLA allele caller and quit it. So now we've generated these files, but the HLA allele caller is not aware of their presence until we add them to the versions files within the settings directories. So if we go back to HLA settings, versions, and then we add in the version v3.41.00 and save that. And we need to do the same for the allele caller pipeline, which uses the settings core directory, versions, version 3.41.00, save. We're now ready to start the HLA allele caller again. And you see now it has the data files for 3.41 as well as the original 3.38 we started with. You can now run your tests for the new data reference files to make sure that everything works fine. And once you've tested everything out and everything's okay, you copy the 3.41 and the 3.41 core directories onto the T drive into the Flex References HLA folder so that everyone can use them. And again, on the T drive, you'll have to go into the settings and settings core directories and add 3.41 to the available versions. Okay, thank you.